Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get pre-orders of all the upcoming Force of Will sets, as well as releases of previous sets after they come out. TCGprime.com with over 100,000 Force of Will singles, as well as out-of-print boxes from the past, and TCG accessories, as well as FoulLibrary.com, a wonderful resource for deck lists, article discussions, and more. Check them out at FoulLibrary.com, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer patrons Shukong Fu, Vite Ramen, and Maxime Van He. Thank you for your support. Class is in session.
Hey there, rulers. Welcome back to the Tournament Report with yours truly, Paul. Today we're going to be taking a look at the recent Wanderer OGP that was hosted by Games and Geek back in April. So without further ado, let's just jump right into this. First of all, the total here is a little bit off, only because some of the deck lists that Charlie mentioned in the comment section of our live stream video in the Force of Will global chat did not totally total up, but it was about 86 players from what I remember. Mid 80s is what we were looking at for an online GP over Easter weekend. That is kind of unheard of, I gotta say. That was kind of wild. The fact that it was Easter was meant, that I couldn't be there. So it was kind of surprising to see that 86 some people could actually be there. But 78 of those deck lists were tallied by Charlie, who was the judge for the tournament. And so we'll get right into that. The most, the deck that was represented the most was Order Alice, which only a few, I think only a couple of decks actually made it into the top 8, which was really interesting. Order Kaguya, which is personally my favorite deck on this list besides Olivia, who's way down at the bottom here, but Order Kaguya got there as well with a friend of the channel getting their deck list into the top 8, as well as Odin, Belial Dante, Milas Mujdart, Dark Tree, and I'm going to move this just ever so slightly so you can see Milas Gruz Ballesta actually had about 4% of representation in the tournament itself. And then we had some 2-ofs in Order Nyarlathotep, some Wolfgangs, Lilius, Milas, and Milas Zero, Olivia, and then some other decks that were just 1-ofs that made it into the actual tournament. But now we're going to get into the top 8 deck lists, and I'm going to be giving you some of my thoughts and some of my analysis over what happened in that. So, the winner of the actual tournament was Steven Holsheiser. Someone who is not unfamiliar with winning GPs. He played a Milas Mujdart list that did not involve burn, interestingly enough. There's a combo in the game in which you can play just a ton of different chants in order to make your magical dragons cheaper and then flood the board. So you're going to be playing things like Manifestation of Power, you're going to be playing And War Begins, or whatever the red card is here that no one played before this tournament, where if it's the first card you cast that game, you draw 2 cards and then reveal to do some burn damage. Loki Enters the Game of Gods, Dinner Time, all of these cards are being used to sort of facilitate your magic dragons getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And of course, your mana base is going to be 1 red at the start of the game, so you're hoping to see either an Ascendant or a Manifestation of Power in your opening hand in order to facilitate those combos, and then Dragon Call to just tutor the magical dragons to your hand. And then, of course, Melfi counts as a chant as well, so if you're able to play her, she's 1 green and a Void Will, so you can filter into that using the Red Will really easily, and then you're just off to the races. The idea, again, is just to magical dragons, swing for game, and just do some really crazy shenanigans with that. The sideboard is really just there for the control matchup. It looks like there's anti-violet stuff, anti Dante Belial shenanigans and Ice Shackles, which doesn't really hurt your deck all too much. You lose the filter, but again, you maintain the red will at the start of the game, so this card doesn't really affect that much in the grand scheme of things, and you can still perform Judgment and flip and do all those fun things. Lorites, again, to stop your opponent from going off if you're playing against a similar deck as this. Witch of the Fallen Kingdom to go witch into Pumpkin Witch for a lethal play line. the bursting demon to, deal additional damage, all which cannot be countered except by Lorite, and then your eternal, your Shiva enters the Game of Gods for eternaling your board. Stephen Holsheiser won the tournament. I cannot talk right now, man. I'm so sorry. And congratulations for that. Wow, what a crazy list, to not think this ruler combination would ever see the top 8 slot, much less the win. Next up, we have Toby Gaffney, another friend of the channel who played Odin. Odin is kind of the anti-meta pick going into this tournament, and it got into the top 2 against Steven. So this deck is really, really solid. Before this, Odin did not see really any play. So it was really interesting to see that it's finally got into a spot where it was actually fairly decent. It gets access to Dark Sun a little bit more consistently in the Wanderer format, which means that you could turn off Kaguya's moons. Odin already had a really strong matchup in that regard in the first place, simply just because he was so good at just stunning Kaguya's board with things like Dark Sun, with things like Mistletoe. So going into this, you're probably playing Artillerist a lot more liberally, which is why you see Gyrians, you see Banquet Demons, you see Ultra Magic Stone Golems to just really consistently find that discard to burn your opponent. And of course you have Odin's Sword, which is right next to Dark Sun in this list. This is a 7-drop in your hand that you can pitch to Artillerist, or you can just play it for 1 if your ruler is Odin. And that really helps you in the aggressive matchups against Nyarlathotep and Violet. Of course, Tea Party really benefits this deck as well. And then again, one of our best cards in the light cards for Wanderer, which is something you're going to have to go back on the channel and find. It's part of our top 20 series. Dark Alice Rabbit Princess is amazing for this deck in that it can recycle Lorites, it can get rid of Artillerists that have already done their effects. It's just super good for value, and I think that's where Odin was really struggling in the lead up to this. But that being said, Wanderer benefits a lot of decks, and Odin is one of them. Of course, you see that Ice Shackles in the sideboard, and then one of my favorite techs, which is in my Olivia video for the deck list that I piloted recently, is Between the Crevices of Time. Wonderful card to unorder something that your opponent controls, all for just 1 blue. There's enough in this deck that can give you access to blue with your 4 Moonshades and your 1 Knowledge Stone. So this card is an interesting tech, to be said, probably a sleeper pick, especially if you're looking for anti-Kaguya cards to just make that matchup even easier. So congratulations to Toby for getting into the top 2 with Odin. Again, wild, super crazy. Next, we have Derek Magwaneza, who was playing something similar to Steven's list, although he was doing something a little bit different with the package and going for the Yogg Sothoth, the Umar et Tawil, Flames of Nyarlathotep, which is a card no one has played in this game up until now. So using that 1 mana from my list to really just find the things that you need in the deck to play Isis, to play Red Wine and Bread, and to just go aggro. The core cards that gave Nyarlathotep, the Order Ruler, just so much potency are really starting to find their way into different Wanderer decks, and this is just one example of that. You might remember back on the channel that I played a Prisia deck that used Red Wine and Bread, Isis, Ascendant, Magic Stone Dance of Chaos, Manifestation of Power, that core group of red cards to really generate value and to put pressure on board. This is an instance where this is really being used to the best effect I can possibly think of. He has the One of Horn in the deck, which is really great because then you can shuffle all of those stones that you sacked off to Isis to draw cards. You can just put them back into the deck. You really don't need the arena expansion anymore because you have Horn. And then the rest of the package here is just disruption, to make sure your opponent can't stop your plays, to make sure you have all of the mana you need to go in for lethal. And then of course Ascendant is a Cthulhu, so he works really well with Yog-Sothoth and the Umer-et-Tawil package. In the sideboard, you have another Horn for the control matchup, especially against Violet. That's going to be really, really good to just shuffle all of their atoms back into the deck, making their draws a little bit less consistent, if you can even say that about Violet. There's a couple of Death Scythe, which is going to be in our top 10 Void cards for Wanderer, because again, it's a really good sideboard card that just shuts down your opponent's swiftness and imperishable for the turn, so super good for that. But it's also good at putting Umer-et-Tawils into the RFG for you to play from outside of the game a little bit easier. And then there's just some other interesting tech in here, like Gradius, the Bursting Flame Demon, and then Violet for just some really hilarious Eternal charge your battery with red mana shenanigans sort of stuff. So this deck is really fascinating in that it actually brings to the forefront some of the Cthulhu support that we saw back in MSW. And so yeah, Derek, congratulations for getting third, and we're gonna move on. Next up we have Brendan Hill. He was piloting the Almerius Mujdar control list, which has kind of been a staple of the format ever since Magic Stone War actually came out, and after Featsing was banned in the Wanderer format. Almerius has this really nice support card, kind of incidentally in Final Stance, in that you can mill it to the graveyard with Rhea because it counts as a darkness card, and then revive it later on when you need to take a second turn. As you flip Almerius. You're playing 2 in case you draw 1, because you really don't want to draw your only Final Stance. There's not a lot of good ways to get them out of the hand. But the fact that you're playing 6 Sages means that you get access to things like Welser, and then just other really good control cards. Some of these cards are very staple in the deck and have been for a while, like Rhea, like number 13, Priscia. Now they have Girion, a Flashing Smile, Suya, and the aforementioned Welser, of course, too. One thing they do get as they go into the Wanderer format is your Featsing Magic Stone, which is wild to see. I'm so glad we finally get to play with this card again. This essentially gives any of your Resonators barrier by just tapping it down. So if you don't use this card and you hold it up during your opponent's turn, you're able to give anything barrier and just make one of their cards whiff for a resource that really just keeps coming. Now, if any of you are confused as to why Savior of Splendor is in the sideboard, if you're not in on the joke or the meme, it's because the Savior of Splendor is the Messiah and it was Easter weekend. So there you go. If you're somebody who works on Easter like me, you might have caught that joke right away. Or if you were somewhere else on Easter, you might have gotten that right away. But of course, you see a lot of the basic staples that we have. Excuse you, CCG Prime. Oh my gosh. Of course, yeah, anyways, that was just super distracting. But you see some of the basic side deck staples, like, again, Ice Shackles, which doesn't really hurt your deck because all you're losing is the filter. Evil Elemental Uprising, remove the graveyard. It's super strong against Violet especially. So there's a lot of tools that you get access to in the Wanderer format now that Violet is a little bit easier to take care of with no Electo, and this deck puts that on display in a very beautiful way. So congratulations to Brendan Hill for getting 4th place, and then we're going to move on here to the 5th through 8, or just the top 8 spots. Force of Will said that this person got 6th. I'm not sure why that is. My understanding is that these lists from here on are just tied for the top 8 spot. So this is the one Alice order deck that actually got into the top 8. This is playing, it does not look like it's playing Tales of Fantasia. So you're essentially just playing a ton of Regalia, getting benefits from those Regalia. They're all 0 cost, like Horn and Death Scythe and Deep Blue the Magic board, and of course Excalibur, which when you discard it, when you have another on the board, you produce a White Will, which is really helpful. You also get access to green sources, so you can play things like Lorite, Girion. Stop talking to me, Dan. Give me just a minute here. blowing up my phone right now. Anyway, like I was saying, you have the Cancel Suite and Fair Spell, Lorite, and Girion. But then you also have your basic Alice support in the Deep Blue Soldier, your Ayus, your Alice Enters, your 3 Tea Party members, your Lina Safarias, and then again, Tea Party and Dark Alice entering the game of Mod. And then you just side a bunch of black sources because you get access to those as a result of Ataractus Memoria and Ruler's Memoria. Those cards, the fact that she just gets Omni Stones is pretty helpful, especially as a Regalia ruler. So the darkness sources in the sideboard are really going to be helpful for getting rid of your opponent's hand, their graveyard. And then he's playing a couple copies of Dark Sun too, which, you know, Christian, if you're here, I'd love to know why. If it's just to like get around things at quick cast speed with an addition, you know, they can't be canceled with like anti-chant stuff. I don't know, but I'd really love to know, and that's my best guess. So if you're watching the video, just let us know down in the comment section down below. I'm very curious as to why you ran Dark Sun. Very fascinating. But congratulations for getting into the top 8 of the first Wanderer GP we've had in so long. Next up, we have one of the friends that I have that goes to our locals in Caledonia. Not Caledonia, excuse me, Ionia, the other one, as well as an Odyssey Games regular, Jordan Williams. Congratulations for getting into the top 8. I played against this deck at locals, and it was absolutely fire. And mostly that's because he's running some random fire support, which seems to have gone really well for him, simply just based on like what he's got going on. So the Isis that he's running, as I get back to my stuff here, the Isis that he's running is actually incorrect in this list. He's actually running, let me see if I can find it. So here we go. We have Isis Last of the Ascendants, and if I scroll down here, it'll give you a little bit better access to her effect. If your ruler is Isis, or Isis the 100-weapon master, your moons produce other things, which is not really what this is for. Instead, you're trying to search out your Nyarlathotep, which he does have in the deck itself, and it allows you to put Fire Moon Edition tokens into the field, which then will produce mana, which is super great. It also has First Strike and Bane, because it does. Not really sure why, but it does. And so what's happening in this list is that he's playing that version of Isis, not the one that gets rid of stones that came out with Nyarlathotep. He's playing that Isis to grab his Nyarlathotep there next to his Dark Alice, and that gets him more moons and potentially another route to lethal. So it's really interesting that he was able to employ that little tiny engine in this version of the list. But he's also playing Faria, and he's playing First Boon Cassius to get additional cards into his hand, because if you've played Kaguya, you notice that she tends to have some difficulty maintaining a hand. And of course, he's just got all of these different win conditions in the deck itself. He's got the Priscia Train, he's got the Grisbalesta's Awakening, he's got, of course, Beats with Hanzo, he's got Galileo, and then he has the Rabbit Ninja in there as well. Excuse me. So he just has so many different avenues in which to get game, and it was fun to play against, I gotta say. It was a lot of fun. All of that being said, his sideboard is pretty standard for any control matchup, right? So you have Exorcist Mage to get things out of your opponent's, get things off your opponent's field as they're trying to cheat them in, i.e. Priscia Train. As you go into matches against things like Violet or Burn matchups, which a Quenched Fire is really helpful, especially if you side into a couple of those Green Witches, or even into more copies of your Black Witches. Hunting Angels for those effects that if your opponent is attacking and you can't like really stop them, this is a good way of just killing them off. And then of course Third Boon, I believe is what that is, puts a level 3 cost or higher back into your opponent's hand, which is also super helpful. A Flashing Smile, in my opinion, is one of the cards that Kaguya absolutely needed, because she does not have a good board wipe outside of something like Magic Stone Golem, which is something I used before this card actually came out, and I threw that thing back in the Staples box faster than I possibly could, just because Flashing Smile is so much better. But all of that being said, Jordan, congratulations for getting into the top 8. Good to see that one of my friends and one of my local players actually made it happen. Next up, we have in the top 8 once again, Josef Cuevas, who was also running a My List deck, but was using Grizz Ballesta instead. And this is one of the decks that we saw on stream that I was really fascinated with because it was doing something a little bit different. So in the matchups that Joseph was playing on stream, you noticed that he used the floating red will to either play Manifestation of Power when he didn't have the coin, so so to speak, and then he also played Ascendant on his opponent's turn if he went second. That whole dynamic allows you to get magic stones into the field, and then because your stones are basically fixed by Grizz Ballesta, you will always have an Omni Stone on turn 1. If, however, you do cheat in a stone with Ascendant or Manifestation of Power, you can tribute that off to get another stone into the field, essentially ramping a stone and making that stone permanent, which is why you're going to see so many stones in his stone deck in particular. There are just really awesome stones in here, like the Reincarnation Stone, which is really, really good with Grizz Ballesta because you can draw a card once it goes to the graveyard. And then you basically just have Magic Stone of Moonlight, which copies any of the will that you're able to produce on the field as long as it's there with that stone. So if you have a Knowledge Stone that's totally unlocked as an Omni Stone, all of a sudden your Moonlight Stone is an Omni Stone and it doesn't hurt you to use it. Super helpful, right? And then you have your basic green package for cancels. You have number 13, Florites, Fairer spells to sort of help with number 13. Your Persia Chain is activatable here. You have Gyrians as well, and then you have Welser. Because you are 6 Sages as tag rulers, Welser is pretty much staple for that deck. And then we have the Magic of Trust and Love for some extra burn damage, which just really allows for you to just grind it out against your opponent and deal some additional burn damage. At the end of all things being said, the sideboard is really interesting because he plays more burn in more Magic and Trust and Love. He plays the Black Witch engine, which ends in Pumpkin Witch, so he can swing in with pretty much everything. He plays a couple of Magic Stone, Ultra Magic Stone Golems for board wiping in games 2 and 3, as well as some Burning Demons to deal additional burn damage against the control matchup. He has Shiva Enters the Game of Gods, probably Shiva's best card. We've seen it in sideboards here quite often because it gives the whole board Eternal, which is rather rare in the game. This is one of our first tools to actually do that. Necronomicon Barrier, very strong card. Did not see a lot of it in sideboards, so it's good to see it here. And then I believe he has Revealing the Power of Salvation as well, which is hilarious if your opponent is discarding your stuff or you just need some life gain. The Rogue Spectator was a flavor of choice, and it was just a really solid card overall for a lot of players who were playing it in their sideboards just for some additional board presence. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Joseph's list. It was very fun to watch, and it was very cool to see that this combination of 6 Sage Rulers actually got playtime. It's not one of those combinations we've seen very often, if ever. So congratulations, Joseph. And then I think we just have Rustin left. Another friend of the channel. Again, I don't think I've ever seen a list repeated here. Even if we've had repeated rulers, the lists are all completely different. And so here is our Belial Dante list. This combination of rulers can go very far, frankly. Simply because we have some of the support that made it so good. I'm actually going to increase this a little bit because the deck is so varied that I'm going to try and move things around just a little bit here for you all. Haha! Okay, so we're going to start with the main deck, okay? So you're obviously playing as Dante, which means you're going to be playing at least a few copies of Virgil. He's playing 3 in this list. And then you're playing Belial, so you can't lose the game, but you're also going to be using other tools to sort of make the game come to you a little bit easier. So you're going to be running... excuse me, I can't quite think here. Oh my gosh. You're going to be playing things like Secret Duel in the Moonlight, Final Battle, Whispers from the Abyss to draw additional cards and reset your life. And all of that is going to go toward you being able to find an Inferno and cast it. And when, you can't lose the game because you paid all your life into that and you Inferno your opponent, they do lose the game. So that's the basic bread and butter combo of this style of deck, which is really easy to figure out. And of course your stone base is really easy to manage as well, because you do have the Satan stone to make it a little bit easier for you to have perfect mana as you need it. So there's a lot of 1-ofs in this deck, and if I remember Charlie DeMeulle on his podcast of this saying that Rustin just didn't have a lot of the cards that he needed. So you're going to see things like Awakening of Gruz Ballesta and some other just really interesting cards, which is why I'm talking about the basic core of the deck. The core of the deck is essentially all that you need in order to go well, and then everything else is just there to support the core of the deck. That's Card Games 101. The core is good. The other stuff really doesn't matter all that much. As long as you're able to facilitate the core win condition. So, and that is Secret Duel in the Moonlight, Inferno, set your life to 0, and then just kill them with Inferno, which is all you really need to do. Everything else is just kind of good. The stone base here is 1 Standstone, Erythropia, 2 Heaven's Rift, other stones that produce white, black, and or red. And then the sideboard, as we go into that, again, you're seeing the Rogue Spectator once again. It's just a really good sideboard card for decks that can go into red fairly easily. You have the Pumpkin Witch to facilitate that combo, as well as the other witches in the sideboard. Satan himself, not just his body, but Satan himself is here. So you're able to sort of reset the game and kill your opponent that way if need be. And then 2 Horn, as well as some other support cards that can come in against certain matchups. Calamity Shield being one of the funnest sideboard cards I've seen in this entire video so far. But anyway, that has been the top 8 deck lists. My opinions on where the meta is going right now, I'm kind of reserved as to how I want to comment on the meta game right now. But we were going into this meta with a lot of expectations that it'd be just kind of the Wild West. What are people going to play? What are people going to come up with? How are certain decks going to stack up? And this was, very open for that reason. So all of that being said, you can take really any one of these decks and go to a GP, and if you can play the deck well, you're going to do well. That's all I'm going to say. There are tons and tons of different ways in which you can access Wander, which is part of the reason we did the top 20-ish with that one that was only 10, because there's not a lot of void cards. The top 20 list for each attribute in the game, because we want you to be able to access all of the cards that can make decks like this. Right? Some of these are just basic utility staples. Some of these are just really powerful cards that you're going to want to have in order to facilitate win conditions like this. Which is, you're seeing some cards in here already, like Inferno, one of the most powerful cards in the multi-attribute category, right? This thing is amazing in the fact that it can just get you into these like really nifty corners to just win you the game or get rid of your opponent's hand or field. Card's frankly amazing. So that being said, if you have a favorite deck, look at the top 8. You're in the top 16. I think they even posted the top 16 deck lists, not even just the top 8 on the global chat. So check that out. Force of Will global page, global group on Facebook is a really good place to find that stuff. You're probably watching this here on that right now. There's a way for you to go and check out those deck lists down below. That being said, gosh, what else do I want to say? I mean, this is just a fun tournament to see all these fun cards. What cards are you guys looking to see banned? I know that there are 3 in particular that this channel is on its watch list. So what cards are you watching right now that you think have the potential to be banned in the future? Let us know in the comment section down below. That being said, guys, I just want to give a special thanks to Charlie DeMeulle and forceofwilltcg.com for all of the ways in which they help to compile this content. That being said, guys, it's been Paul. I'll catch you in the next tournament report next time.